Preparing for the uprising, one of the locals angrily exclaimed that since Kuroi was arrested, we must start acting now. And Khan spoke to the crowd, thanking them all, but we cannot leave it to Grid and Kuroi. Preparing for the coup d'etat, the angry people shouted, "Let's protect our future. This time we will gain freedom by our own efforts." A few seconds later, an arrow hit one of the members of the uprising in the back, and he fell to the ground in pain. Looking in the direction from which the arrow had come, the people saw Valmont standing in the doorway of the smithy saying, "I knew about him in the uprising." And seeing the Baron, the people shouted his name in anger. Looking at the rascal who, after an unfair competition, had come to take the forge by force, Khan said to him, "You have falsified the results of the competition, and now you want to take the whole village for yourself, and you are not afraid of the people's anger." Hearing these words from one of the rebels, Valmont turned to the general of his army and said, "Sir Philipson, what do you call it? A lord should not feel fear. I am right." To which he replied, "Of course we must suppress the uprising now." Hearing these words from the general of his army, Lord Valmont smiled ominously and said, "Just leave the forge and surrender. I want to go to rest as soon as possible." Immediately after these words, Sir Philipson shouted to his subjects to arrest the rebel leader Khan, to which they replied, "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, Kuroi, who had been in prison for hours on end, mentally counted the number of days that had already passed. Looking unhealthy after being in the dungeon, the boy added heavily, "Someone let me out of here." At the same moment, the members of the emergency meeting, watching the boy, nervously said, "Kuroi's ECG is too unstable. If this continues, we cannot guarantee Ulaanbaatar's health." Turning her gaze to the general manager of the Mongolian branch, she nervously added, "If we don't get him out of the system, the situation will get out of control." Hearing these words from his employee, Park Inhek said thoughtfully, "But 48 hours have passed in real time. Now we should concentrate on helping him complete his quest." Hearing this, one of the people in the room said it was too dangerous because his potential savior Grid had been arrested, and then another employee added, "Do you really want to entrust the fate of our company to a player like Grid?" Immediately after these words, one of the men nervously added that the probability of his rescue at the moment was only 9%, and the manager replied nevertheless. Changing the subject, the manager added that because of his arrest, he had become much closer to Kuroi, and we still had hope. After these words, the general manager of the Mongolian branch mentally said, "Even in such a desperate situation, I still feel that something must happen. Maybe he is a low-level and incredibly greedy player." Thinking of the Grid on whom all hopes are now pinned, the man added in his mind, "But his perseverance is commendable. He will certainly do something about this Xinyan." After finishing his thoughts, the general manager of the Mongolian branch looked at his employees with a stern look and confidently said, "There are only 2 hours left. Let's give him a chance." At the same time, somewhere in the dungeon of Winston Castle, in one of the interrogation rooms, the voice of one of the guards could be heard angrily shouting at Grid, demanding that he repent, telling us who Kuroi had contacted, to which he replied that you were talking about something like that. Receiving only excuses from Grid, the angry guard shouted, "If you don't give us answers to the questions we are asking, we will kill you." To which Grid replied, "I don't know. Kill me if you want." Immediately after these words, Grid added angrily, "You are in charge of all this. You can kill me if you want to." Hearing this provocation, the guard immediately gave into it and reached for his sword and shouted that you are a scoundrel. Looking at his opponent burning with anger, Grid mentally said, "No matter what method, I must die here." Imagining Khan's image in his mind, he added, "If I become a prisoner and lose this competition, then Khan will not be able to bear the pain of losing his forge." The next moment, looking over at the soldier who had already drawn his sword and was ready to act, Grid mentally said, "But if this guy really dares to kill me," preparing to provoke the soldier to finish him off, Grid said in his head, "I will be reborn and return to Khan." But before he could say anything, a gag was shoved into his mouth, and Grid shouted to the guard, "Now kill me!" Looking back to see who had done this to him, Grid heard another soldier say, "Calm down, Leo. You know that people like him have immortal bodies." Immediately after that, the guard added, "Take him to solitary confinement. He'll tell us everything he knows, sooner or later." Hearing this, Grid nervously exclaimed that, realizing that they knew about his immortality and that no one would kill him, Grid nervously thought, "This is very bad. If I am imprisoned, then Khan's life will be in danger, and I will not be able to leave the game while I am in the cell." Looking at the guard with a nervous look, Grid mentally said, "I'm ready to tell you everything. Just take the gag out of my mouth. Forgive me, Khan." Looking at his friend who had gone to prepare a solitary cell for Grid, the guard added, "Don't let him out until he cooperates with us." Hearing this, Grid exclaimed, "I'm ready, you fool." Throwing the boy into the cell and hearing him groan, the angry guard shouted at him, "Shut up! If you want to get out of there, then tell us everything." As soon as the guard left, a system notification appeared in front of Grid, stating that the Apostle of Justice quest had been created. Rescue Kuroi. Conditions: rescue Kuroi in 7 hours. Reward: the title, Apostle of Justice, will be created. Task associated with Kuroi. Penalty for failure. Leveled up to the title, Coward. When Grid saw that he had a new mission, he was surprised to hear in his head that it seems like I've seen these rewards before. This is the quest that Kuroi showed me. After reviewing the conditions and penalties for failure, Grid mentally said, "But I'm in a dungeon now. This task is simply impossible to complete in 7 hours. The penalty for failure is just terrible. What a stupid quest, I will never take it." Just as he was about to refuse, a system notification came in saying that you can't refuse a quest. The quest was accepted. Being tied and gagged in the dungeon, Grid said in frustration in his head, "It's been 3 hours, of course there's no one to come and free me." Banging his head against the wall, frustrated by this situation, Grid mentally said in his head, "In 26 years of my life, I have not won a single cent. I should have realized what was behind the legendary class." Shedding tears because he was in such a hopeless situation, Grid said in his head in frustration, "The goddess of luck has turned her back on me forever." Suddenly, somewhere in the corridors of the cave, a woman's voice was heard. It was Ephemera, repeating over and over again, "Grid, you are here. Hey, Grid." Hearing this voice, Grid immediately got to his feet and began to look where she was going. Recognizing the voice, the boy was surprised to think that it was Arena. But what she was doing here was not important right now. She was my last hope. Continuing to search for Grid, who did not respond to her call, the girl said unhappily, "Where is this ill-mannered boy?" Hearing such words in his address, Grid said angrily in his head, "That damn child." As soon as he thought about it, a system notification appeared in front of him that said, "You have 2 hours left to complete the quest." Seeing this, Grid began to bang his head against the door, thinking, "Damn it, time is almost up. I need to get her attention somehow." Hearing a noise behind her coming from one of the cells, the girl was surprised to hear that it was around here. Looking around, she noticed Grid not far from her, who was looking through the window of one of the cells with a bruised head. Looking at the guy, who didn't look good, she nervously said, "Oh my God, you scared me, but it doesn't matter. The main thing is that you're here." Trying to say something, Grid only managed to groan awkwardly, while the girl fumbled in her bag for something and said, "Wait a little longer. I'll get you out of here soon. But for now." Taking out the dagger that he had made at the competition, the girl handed it to the boy and said happily, "Here, take this. It rightfully belongs to you. You have done something really incredible." When Grid heard that she had brought him his dagger and even praised his work, he smiled happily and thought to himself, "This is the dagger I made. Now I see that she is a very smart and kind girl." Immediately after that, Grid heard something else that surprised him greatly. Before releasing the boy and giving him his weapon, Ephemera said, "But I have one condition." Folding her arms and smiling happily, the girl said, You will make me an orb that can hold as many different spells as possible." Hearing what the girl wanted, Grid was very surprised and then thought that the orb was a magical object. But why she was asking me to make it, I had never done anything like that before. Not long after thinking about the girl's proposal, Grid confidently said in his head, "Oh well, it doesn't matter. Let it be as she wishes." But as soon as he thought about it, the girl added one more thing. The next request was made in a threatening tone. The girl said to Grid, "Don't call me a child. I have a name. My name is Ephemera, so please call me that." Hearing the second demand from Ephemera, Grid said in his head, "What the hell was Arena? It was just her pseudonym. There are so many conditions here." After releasing the boy from the cell and freeing him from the ropes that bound him, the girl heard him say as soon as he removed the gag from his mouth, "Phew, I'm finally free." And handing him the dagger, Ephemera said, "Here, take it." Grid picked up his weapon and looked at the girl and said, "Why do you need to save me?" But wait a minute, how did the blacksmith get into the dungeon? Hearing the boy's question, Ephemera looked back and confidently said, "I am not a blacksmith," and Grid said in surprise, "But how could he have done that?" Hearing Grid's question, the girl happily said, "I am the owner of the Hidden Duplicator class. I copied Khan's skills during our competition and thus was able to use the skills of a blacksmith." As soon as Grid received this information about this girl, he immediately exclaimed in surprise that you are a hidden class. But there are only 3 people in which only he said this, and immediately fell silent after a meek pause, realizing that he might have said, "But wait, so you are one of them?" "Yes." The next moment, after thinking about this situation, Grid asked in surprise, "But why would you reveal your identity to me? Because before that you had been using a pseudonym." Immediately after her answer, the girl added, "But you also have a hidden class because I'm right, at least with a unique rating." Following Ephemera, Grid said in surprise, "Is such a development possible? I like you. I like girls with shapes," to which she replied with displeasure, "Stop talking about what you don't know." The next moment, looking back at Grid, the girl replied, "I don't know what class you are in, but you should fight to the best of your ability." Turning her gaze to the crowd of guards who were coming at them from the exit, she added worriedly, "Otherwise they will just finish us both off." Seeing the countless enemies heading for them, Grid exclaimed in fear, "Why are there so many of them? Is the whole army here?" Hearing this, the girl replied, "I have already dealt with more than I need your help to survive." Having received the girl's request for help, Grid said in confusion, "Damn it, I have only one dagger. How can I help you?" The next moment, he decided to look at the object he had created. Looking at the characteristics of his dagger, Grid saw that it had a unique rarity of strength points, attack power, and plus attack speed and additional parameters for instant kill probability, agility, plus wind strike and fast movements. Pulling his dagger out of its sheath, the boy received system notifications that said this item was created by you. You have reached the understanding of the item. You do not meet the requirements. Penalties will be applied. The attack power will be reduced by half, and only half of the available effects of the item will be available. Looking at his item that he had created, Grid said in disappointment in his head, "It was so cruel to get a penalty as the creator of the item." Seeing the incredible dagger, the girl exclaimed in amazement, "Wow, your real class is killer." Looking at the dagger that he was able to use, the girl was surprised to hear that one of the conditions was to have a higher level of dagger skills. "But you are also a master blacksmith. How did you do it?" After receiving this question from the girl, Grid thoughtfully said in his head, "This child seems to have seen the description of the dagger. Seeing her confused expression is really quite cute." The next moment, the girl nervously exclaimed, "Oh, get ready, they are coming here." Hearing this, Grid noticed that something was flying right at him, only because he was able to dodge the spear that was fired at him at the last moment. Looking back at where a large number of enemies were running from, Grid said, "You little rascal, you should have warned me about this in advance." Deciding that something had to be done to delay the enemies, Grid used his dagger to use the wind strike skill. With just one use, This attack was able to neutralize a large number of enemies who were following them with a desire to finish them off. Seeing how Grid had dealt with the enemies in just a few seconds, the girl was amazed and said, "Wow, that's just incredible." And at that moment, Grid angrily shouted, "Hey, are you just going to stand there and watch ephemera?" Hearing Grid's question, the girl shrugged and said, "My goal was only to free you. Now I can rest, and my skills are a little expensive." Hearing that she regretted using her skills in this situation, Grid exclaimed, "Don't be greedy in this situation." The next moment, Grid received a system notification that said he had an hour and 25 minutes left to complete the quest to rescue Kuroi. Seeing this, Grid groaned in frustration and mentally said, "Oh shit, I don't have time and I won't be able to deal with them either." The next moment, Grid looked back at the girl and said, "Ephemera, don't be so stubborn. We have someone else we have to save." Hearing this, the girl was surprised to hear that there was someone else. The next moment she said, "I have already rescued an old man, Khan, on the way here." And when Grid found out about it, he was surprised to hear that he was also arrested. Immediately after that, Grid confidently added, "Well, I am very grateful to you for saving my grandfather, but the one we need to save is another guy. His name is Kuroi." Hearing this, the girl was surprised to ask who he was, and Grid replied, "I met him only once, so I don't know everything." Hearing that he had no idea whom they were going to save, the girl said unhappily, "I don't want to waste time on a stranger, it's quite a chore, you know." Hearing that she was beginning to refuse, Grid shouted angrily, "Hey, I don't want to be involved in all this either. Just listen to me, you insolent little child." When he heard that he had broken his promise and called her something he shouldn't have, Ephemera said angrily, "Didn't I tell you that before or something?" Preparing to strike a serious blow at anyone who came under her arm in a fit of rage, she added, "Don't call me a child in any way." The next moment, aiming at Grid, she shouted out a spear of destruction, and dodging the attack, Grid could see the destructive power of her spell. At the same time, the guards who were heading for the intruders saw that the attack that was aimed at Grid had come at them and had to prepare for the worst. Having destroyed many enemies on their way and cleared the way, leaving only a few soldiers near the walls who were not affected by the spell, the intruders heard someone shouting, "Be careful, she's dangerous." Looking at the girl who had just made a rather powerful attack so instantly, Grid said in his head in fear, to create such strong magic without training, and she could even compete with Yura right after that. Ephemera said, "I'll close my eyes this time as we have someone else to save." Immediately after these words, she looked back at Grid and added, "But I would be very happy if you never called me child again." Hearing this, Grid was frightened and said to Ephemera, "I'm sorry, I've done a terrible sin, ma'am." Following the girl who was leading him to the rest of the cells that were still in the dungeon, Grid asked how much longer we would be walking here. "Isn't the third floor the last one?" To which Ephemera replied that we needed to go down to the fourth floor. Looking at his timer, which showed that he still had an hour and 10 minutes left, Grid nervously said, "Are you sure Kuroi can't be above us?" Hearing this question from her friend, the girl confidently replied, "I checked the first and second floors while I was looking for you. There was not a soul there. Don't worry. The person who told me about the floor is trustworthy." When they reached the fork in the road that led them in different directions, Grid said nervously, "That's all well and good, but which way do you want us to go now?" No sooner had he said this than behind him, Grid heard the voices of the guards shouting, "They're down below, let's go get them." About to run away, Grid nervously called out to Ephemera, "Let's check this way first." But the girl's attention was elsewhere. Looking at the blue flower that grew in the dungeon, she wondered how such a beautiful flower could grow in this terrible dungeon. Hearing these words, Grid nervously said, "Wait, but don't touch it." Hearing the warning from the boy, Ephemera stopped for a second. Then Grid added, "Look, they are all united." Stepping over one of the traps that had been set in the dungeon, Grid said, "Luckily, the traps are visible to the naked eye, so they won't be dangerous if you're careful." As soon as he said this, he noticed that an axe from an activated trap flew right in front of his face. Looking back with a disgruntled look, Grid saw that Ephemera had picked the flower after all, noticing that she had almost killed the guy. The girl said awkwardly, "Heh, heh." That was enough. Sweating from this sudden danger, Grid said to his partner, "Please be careful," and then mentally added, "How is it possible for this child to be so distracted?" The next moment, Grid had to dodge another activated trap. Looking back at his partner, who had done something stupid again, Grid heard her say, "I was eating a banana. I was hungry." Continuing on his way, Grid suddenly heard the girl say, "Oh Grid, look, there's another flower here. This flower has activated another trap." Dodging another trap activated by the girl, Grid said angrily, "Hey, Ephemera, be smarter. How many times do I have to repeat that these are all traps?" Hearing these words from Grid, the girl confidently said, "We need to activate them to ensure our safety when we leave. That's what we should have done in the first place. If you don't know about it, then why should I listen to you?" As they talked and slowly moved forward, activating each trap, a couple of guards checking one of the passageways called out, "I found them. They're here. Come on, everyone." Hearing the sound of them being overtaken, Grid jumped into the hole, and seeing this, the girl exclaimed in concern, "Hey, what are you doing?" To which he replied, "I'm going to leave the soldiers on you." Once on the 4th floor of the dungeon, the guy added, "I have no armor, which is why I will simply be useless in battle. Destroy them with fire magic or something else. The search for Kuroi remains on me." Having gone in search of Kuroi, Grid shouted to the girl, "I'm counting on you." And hearing this, Ephemera exclaimed with displeasure how selfish this guy was. The next moment, the girl exclaimed, "If I use fire magic in a closed space, we'll just fry, you idiot." Going in search of Kuroi, Grid mentally said duplicator, so it turns out that she can copy other people's skills. Usually, it takes a long time to activate higher-level magic. Continuing on his way, Grid also continued his thoughts, saying in his head, "But she can use it instantly. It's a cheat. But thanks to her, I don't have to worry about the soldiers." As Grid set out to fulfill his mission, he mentally said, "I believe in you, little one." At the same time, Ephemera had just used her powerful skill called the Ice Queen's Breath. Having already dealt with quite a few guards, the girl sighed heavily and said, "They keep coming even in spite of this incredible magic." Choosing which skill to use next, the girl thoughtfully said in her head, "It would be much easier if I used fire magic with area damage, but then the whole dungeon would blow up." As she prepared to use her next skill, Ephemera thought, "I still have 11 skills left over from the quest with Piaro, and that's why I can't lose to ordinary soldiers." After saying such confident words, the girl nervously added in her head that the problem was that the 5 Winston Knights were not among these people. Noticing that the girl was alone, one of the guards shouted out to the rest of the group to track him down. As soon as the guards said this, they were immediately attacked by a sword of light attack that killed a large number of enemies. Watching his comrades die so fast right before his eyes, one of the guards nervously said, "This girl is really strong." Trying to hold back the enemies who kept coming, Ephemera nervously said in her head, "I beg you, please come back as soon as possible." As she prepared to use her next skill, she thought to herself, "I only have 10 skills left. I won't be able to hold this army back for very long." At the same time, Grid, who was traveling on the 4th floor of the dungeon, exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, it's the same voice as Hooray." Running around the corner from where the boy's voice was coming from, Grid confidently exclaimed, "This is where I have to endure all this torment because of him." After a short pause, the boy added, "As soon as I see him," and before he could finish, he saw one of the guards in front of him. At the same time, the guard, seeing Grid in front of him, exclaimed in surprise, "You are surely you! I am Leo, the Knight of Winston." Preparing to fight the intruder, the knight confidently said, "I know you escaped from prison. If you have any connection to Kuroi, you must know why I'm here." Seeing the enemy in front of him, Grid nervously said in his head, "Damn, knights are at least a level. What should I do after these thoughts?" he said to the enemy. "You have the courage, I see. Everyone I've met before could only make noise." Hearing such provocative words in his address, Leo said angrily, "You don't know how to keep your mouth shut, you idiot. rushing at the guy to get even with him for everything he had said to him this time and last time. Leo exclaimed, "I will have to teach you some rules of cultural behavior." Seeing that he had rushed at him, Grid nervously thought, "What a mess, and why did I provoke him?" And then shouted out the blacksmith's rage with quick movements. After activating the skills, Grid received system notifications that said in the next few seconds, your strength and attack speed will be significantly increased in the next minute. Your agility and probability of evasion will be significantly increased. Then, Grid mentally said, "I will have to fight him." As soon as he thought about it, he saw that the enemy was already right in front of him, forcing him to act immediately. Trying to block the enemy's attack, Grid nervously said in his head, "What the hell happened to him so quickly in front of me?" After the attack was repelled, Grid was thrown back some distance and he mentally said, "Oh, he's too fast. I barely blocked his attack without the dagger skill. If I hadn't moved quickly, I would have been finished." Seeing that his attack did not reach its goal, the angry Leon shouted out to insult me and also to block my attack. Some blacksmith decided to humiliate my pride. Immediately after these words, using his full combat power, the knight angrily shouted, "I will have to fight to my fullest. Get ready to meet my death." Immediately after that, Grid received a powerful blow, after which he received system notifications that informed him that you had taken damage as your health reached the minimum mark. The skill legend does not die so easily. You will be invulnerable for the next few seconds. Taking a healing potion from his inventory and immediately using it, Grid nervously said what kind of incredible power he had. He needed to drink the potion immediately. Immediately after he resumed his mileage, Grid noticed an enemy standing in front of him, not realizing what he was expecting. The boy said in surprise that why he suddenly stopped. The next moment, one of Winston's knights fainted after being fried by the rascal. Looking at the enemy who had taken a considerable amount of damage, Grid immediately recalled the words of Ephemera, who had told him that if I use fire magic in a confined space, we will fry fool. And then he added, it was an explosion of dust or something. Losing consciousness after he had neutralized himself, the defeated Leo said in a hoarse voice, "What have you done to me?" Hearing this, Grid wiped the sweat from his face and confidently said it was just a difference in our skills, Boogaloo, and then mentally said, "Take that, idiot." Falling to the ground after he had blown himself up, the exhausted Leo said in conclusion it was simply impossible. Moving on, Grid received system notifications that said, "You defeated Knight Winston. You received the title of Night Killer. You picked up the key to the prison. You received a new level." After recalculating the number of levels received after the victory, the system reported that you are now at the 45th level. Arriving at the cell where Kuroi was sitting and opening the door to him, Grid said to the prisoner, "I was planning to beat you, but I didn't." Immediately after these words, Grid smiled happily and added, "You look like you're going to die, Kuroi." Seeing his savior, Kuroi nervously said, "You're the same Kanya." The next moment, Grid received a system notification that the mission was complete. When the mission was completed, Kuroi also received a system notification that said, "You have received the second class of Apostle of Justice." After which the guy said, "You are my savior." Upon completion of the quest, Grid received his title of Apostle of Justice, as well as other rewards that were also described in the rewards section of the task. Bowing his head to his savior Kura, Mr. Grid said and then mentally added, "It doesn't matter who it is because he helped me complete the quest." The next moment, the boy confidently added, "I will be faithful to you." Immediately after these thoughts, the boy said, "I am Dam Alambatar, descendant of the Blue Wolves." Lowering his head, Kuroi solemnly said, "Accepting the title of Associate of the Apostle of Justice, I will follow you and return the favor." Looking at the rescued boy with a surprised look, Grid mentally said in his head what was happening to him. A duplicator is someone who is able to copy the skills and gain the benefits of each class, and even at first it may seem that this is the best class in the game. Together with the right combination of skills, A duplicator can even defeat a boss alone or become an army in the person of just one person. It all depends on the owner. However, it can copy only 3 skills per day and use them only once. It has only 9 basic skills that cannot be used in combat, and it has terribly low physical abilities. Based on this information, the duplicate with a huge number of skills can be considered the strongest player in the game. But when all of his saved abilities are used up, he is the strongest. At the same time, Ephemera will be completely helpless. Looking at the girl whom they have been unable to capture for a long time, one of the guards said in surprise that it was incredible that she had single-handedly destroyed several hundred soldiers. At the same time, watching the enemies, the girl said tiredly, "The elite knights are still alive. I have used all my skills, but they don't know about it, and that's why they are afraid to attack me." After these thoughts, she remembered the moment when the boy jumped down the hole to the 4th floor, shouting so much faster than walking up the stairs. She thought that a powerful explosion had occurred earlier. Since Grid had not yet returned, it was possible to imagine that he had died. The next moment, the girl gritted her teeth in anticipation of the enemy's attack and thought, even if he managed to save Kuroi, why am I so sure that he will return here? While the girl was thinking, one of the guards said to his friend what we should do if that boy Grid runs away, to which the friend replied that the Lord's guards would be waiting for him at the exit. We should worry about this girl and not about Grid. Immediately after these words, one of the soldiers said, "I'm ashamed to say this, but let's join forces." Hearing this, Ephemera gritted her teeth and mentally said, "Oh no, I won't be able to hold them back. I'm finished." Preparing to use the remaining spells in case of emergency, Ephemera mentally said the remaining 3 spells that have fire attributes. If I use them, I will simply finish myself off. The next moment, a pair of knights joined forces and rushed at the girls, shouting to grab her. Dodging the attacks with her own strength, the girl nervously said in her head, "I shouldn't have trusted him. Why did I get into this in the first place?" After dodging one attack, she noticed that another enemy was coming at her from behind, and she nervously said that the attack was coming from 2 sides. Activating her standard defensive skill, the girl mentally said, "I can't just give up. I'll try to use at least my basic skill." Hitting the girl's protective shield, one of the knights happily exclaimed, "Look, it looks like she has no more strength, so I was worried for nothing." Approaching the girl, one of the guards said menacingly, "This is the payback for all the dead soldiers who fell at your hands." Pointing his sword at the exhausted girl, the knight added nothing personal to the good. Realizing what a difficult situation she was in, the girl confidently said in her head, "We are not done yet. I still have a chance."